Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora. The National Party is obviously asleep in Parliament tonight and aren't taking their calls on this very important bill. Because, Mr Speaker, this is an embarrassment to the country, because what we're seeing is an amendment bill be introduced to Parliament under urgency Well, Mr Young, if you want to go back to the people of Taranaki and say you're doing your best to have a good, strong regulation of the oil industry, but you're quite comfortable to pass these amendment bills to fix up the messes that the current minister has put, that you're comfortable to not have any regulatory impact statement, any select committee process, no real explanatory statement, no Bill of Rights Act vet, if you're comfortable with that, if you're comfortable with such a laissez-faire approach to oil regulation in this country, when we're talking about our pure 100% environment, when we're talking about our aquaculture industries, our tourism industries, our fishery industries, when you talk about the future of our economy, we should be standing up and protecting it, having the best regulation. But instead what we see is cowboy tactics from this government. We heard the Prime Minister say we won't allow cowboys in this industry, but what we're seeing is cowboy behaviour from the government benches. Mr Speaker, it's an embarrassment. I want to touch on 4 points. I want to talk on the Minister's role in this fiasco in the House. I want to talk about the shoddy process we're seeing. I want to talk about the cowboys we're encouraging with this amendment bill. And then lastly, I want to talk about what we should really call this bill, which is the China National Offshore Oil Corporation Law. Because this is what I believe this is really about. So, Mr Speaker, this isn't a minor technical bill. This is making a significant number of changes to a very important piece of our legislation, protecting our economy, protecting our environment and protecting our workers and people's health and safety. Mr Speaker, I don't want to play personal politics, because I don't believe that's the right way to go. And I'm not going to put it on the Minister. But what I am going to say is I think we're seeing an inexperienced Minister over his head, Mr Speaker, trying to fix the mistakes. Mr Speaker, it is an embarrassment for this government that an Amendment Act, which still hasn't even come into effect, needs to be amended under urgency, but in such fundamental and in numerous ways, Mr Speaker. We're seeing a minister over his head. The legislation originally was full of holes, but the minister was quite happy once again, I guess like Jonathan Young was quite happy, to not have a select committee process, to not have a Bill of Rights Act vet for the fundamental Anadarko Amendment, which former Prime Minister, prominent Queen's Counsel said were a fundamental breach of human rights, and said quite possibly breached international law. But National was quite happy to run ahead in a cowboy fashion, and here we are seeing the consequences, and I agree with Moana Maki. How long will it be till we're back in this chamber fixing the holes in this rushed Amendment Act amendment bill? It still sounds ridiculous just saying it out loud, Mr Speaker. Amendment Act amendment bill. Mr Speaker, the process is shocking. We're seeing budget urgency being abused, I believe. We don't see any regulatory impact statement. Now, I know it's not a standing order of our Parliament, but there is a convention that the explanatory statement will actually refer to what's in the legislation, particularly important pieces. Now, what we know is Clause 14 of this new Amendment Act amendment bill is extending the jurisdiction of this country an extra 1.7 million square kilometres over the continental shelf. Mr Speaker, this is the subject matter of huge international tension at the moment. We see China, we see North Korea, we see South Korea, we see China debating these issues over the Spratly Islands. We see the Arctic nations of Canada, Russia, the United States arguing about these issues. Who controls the continental shelf? National, though, unilaterally has decided under budget urgency to go and decide what the jurisdictional issues are over the continental shelf. And Mr Speaker, I wish the Foreign Minister would share his opinion on this legislation, because what we're doing is an unprecedented step, a unilateral step, taking something which has vexed international scholars, international legal experts and governments for more than 4 decades, Mr Speaker, but National has gone ahead and decided under urgency. And I think, Mr Speaker, what we're seeing again is a minister in over his head. So we see no Bill of Rights Act vet. Mr Speaker, the process is shocking. Now, there's going to be a number of calls because we're looking at this legislation under all stages. And I do want to very briefly touch on, I know there'll be a lot more time to discuss it in detail, but the substantial amendment in this Amendment Act amendment bill, which is that the government is easing up, liberalising, taking a laissez-faire approach to who gets an oil permit in New Zealand. Now, I understand 2 weeks ago the government opened up 189,000 square kilometres of New Zealand's water open to deep-sea drilling. And they said, we've got the best standards in the world and world-class regulations and only the best for New Zealand. But what they're doing is relaxing, weakening the standards of who gets a permit. Now, the Prime Minister said we're not going to allow cowboys to get permits, but what they're doing is allowing companies without the financial expertise, without the financial backing, or without the expertise to do the things they're applying for permits to get permits. Mr. Speaker, this is incredibly worrying because what we're going to see is a posse of cowboys enter New Zealand to speculate in the oil market. And the background to this bill, of course, is that their oil strategy, the Minister's oil strategy, has been such a woeful failure in its own terms. I mean, we've seen Petrobras go, we've seen Apache go, we've seen Anadarko delay their activities. The strategy has been such a failure to attract the big players down to New Zealand that now, just to keep up appearances, they're trying to bring in all the small speculators around the world, trying to come down to New Zealand and speculate. It's incredibly worrying, Mr. Speaker, because we don't want cowboy activity in our oil sector. Now, lastly, why are we amending Clause 14, which amends the definition offshore, which is important? Because all they're adding in Clause 14, and it wasn't until about 10 p.m. last night, I actually saw why the word "or" was so important. Because what the original Anadarko amendment said was that the provisions, the 5 new offences to criminalise protest activity at sea, only apply in the territorial sea and the exclusive economic zone. By adding the word "or" to extend jurisdiction over the continental shelf, what this government is doing is encouraging and expanding their powers over another 1.7 million square kilometres. Now, why this is significant, Mr. Speaker, is last week the China National Offshore Oil Corporation and Shell announced they would be applying to a permit where? Over the continental shelf in between New Zealand and New Caledonia. I wouldn't be surprised if Official Information Act show that the Minister probably received a phone call from one of these players saying, hey, did you realise your Amendment Act didn't cover our activities? Because we're worried about protesters, we're worried about New Zealanders standing up for our interests, we're worried about Kiwis who are looking out for the environment and the economy. Do something about it. So, of course, Minister Bridges said, well, how high would you like me to jump, Mr. Speaker? So what we see is an embarrassing process, a shoddy process. We're encouraging cowboys. We're seeing benefits again to the big mates of the National Party. It's a bad day for Parliament, Mr. Speaker. I don't think anyone's proud to see this legislation in front of the House, but I'm sure there'll be a lot more to say about it. So, kia ora.
Senator Sam Ottawinga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure.